Presenting
The Complete
Orson Welles
and the Mercury Theater on the Air in The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
as the third man.
Stand by.
We'll be on the air in 15 seconds, Mr. Wells. Yes, I know.
Stand by, everybody.
Mercury Theater on the Air presents Orson Welles as Count Dracula in his own version of Bram Stoker's great novel,
Who knows
Dracula.
what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Hello world, welcome to The Complete Orson Welles, brought to you by Dwayne Old Time Radio. This podcast will feature various classic radio programs ranging mostly from 1936 to 1952 that Orson either produced and directed, was featured on, or starred as a guest. If you enjoy my podcast, you can subscribe to receive notifications of new posts. Subscribing is free and only takes a moment. New episodes are posted weekly. If inclined, please leave a rating and or review on your preferred podcast service. Thank you for your support. Hope you enjoyed the genius of Mr. Welles. The Black Museum returns with their 10th and 11th episodes. The Champagne Glass and A Claw Hammer. Difficult to find any accurate dates for the Black Museum, but it aired between 1951 and 1952.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
The Black Museum, a repository of death. Yes, here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects, a man's necktie, a woman's glove, a boy's school cap, all are touched by murder. Now here's a champagne glass. That's a familiar object, long stem, delicate curve, shining crystal. This fragile object belongs to New Year's Eve, to weddings and to anniversaries.
Funny about things like this, Sergeant?
Funny, sir? I'd say that one was loaded.
I meant funny in a philosophical sense, Sergeant. Funny how human beings can take an article meant for happiness and use it for tragedy.
Well, anyway, that champagne glass can be found today in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum. Here we are, in the Black Museum. Scotland Yard's Museum of Murder. This place echoes with violent death. Voices are hollow here, whether the hollowness is caused by the high-vaulted ceilings or by the reaction of the human mind to the atmosphere of this room. The effect is the same. Everybody who comes here learns a sense of fear. Natural, because here lies death. Death, cruel, unnecessary, vengeful, or greedy. Still the kind of death brought by one man or one woman on another. This is a record to be studied not merely by criminologists, but by every student of man's inhumanity to man. Here's an iron skillet. It's heavy in your hand, the kind of kitchen utensil your grandmother used. Well balanced, quite suitable for frying eggs or veal chops, or for bashing a skull, perhaps. There's little doubt as to the use which brought this particular skillet here. Yes. And here's the champagne glass. It's well designed, graceful. You could place it with a companion on a silver tray, as Colonel Harry Reid did. You could pop a cork and then fill the glasses, as Colonel Harry Reid did. And you might say, as the dapper colonel did,
To you, my dear Elizabeth, to your return and your complete recovery.
I wish I could drink to that wholeheartedly, Harry. Really, I do.
Well, why not, my dear? You've been released. You're...
That's it exactly. I've been released. Not merely sent home from a hospital, so to speak. After all, the hospital I was in had bars on the windows.
Oh, I insist, my dear, that you touch glasses with me and drink at once. That's no way to talk.
But, Harry,
Ah, there are no buts, Elizabeth. Many people have had nerve breakdowns, and the vast majority of them have recovered.
Very well, Harry, dear. But not to me, to you. The most patient of husbands in the world.
So they drank the champagne, and all was well. It was very pleasant, very relaxing, reassuring. But the world is always too much with us, and the Colonel finally had to say,
You rest until dinner, Elizabeth. I've a brief appointment. I won't be long.
And the Colonel kissed his wife, and the Colonel went off to his appointment.
It's 6 months now, Reed. One way or the other, the matter ought to be settled.
I assure you, Davis, there's nothing to worry about. These things take time.
There's been plenty of time. Look, Reed, if you don't want to complete the deal, return the £500.
But it's not up to me. My client...
Your client indicated willingness to dispose of the property. My client paid the deposit in good faith. We consider it a binder on the contract. We waited 6 months.
Your £500 is quite safe, Davis. You can reassure your client. And on my side, we'll go through with the deal as soon as everything is clear.
Well, I certainly hope so. My people want to take possession.
And they shall indeed, and soon. Meanwhile, there's no reason for misunderstanding between us, is there? After all, we live in the same small town. We see each other constantly. You know, John, I've often wondered why we don't see more of each other. Socially, that is.
Rather a changeable fellow, the Colonel, isn't he? There were other changes ahead, more serious ones. They first came to somewhat public notice the night our Colonel called Dr. Ashley to his home.
Ah, Dr. Ashley. Good of you to come so quickly.
You made it sound rather urgent, Colonel. Is it really serious?
Yes, I'm afraid, Doctor. Really afraid. It's my wife.
Has she broken down again?
No. She complains of terrible pain in her abdomen.
I'd better see her at once.
Yeah, this way, please. If you can, Doctor.
Yes?
She seems to me to be as much frightened as she is in pain.
Oh? What exactly do you mean by that?
Frightened that, that her pain is in her imagination.
I see. Oh, very well. I'll bear that in mind, Colonel.
In here.
If you'll wait outside, Colonel, please.
Oh, must I, Doctor?
I prefer it.
Very well.
Now then, Mrs. Reed. Can you hear me, Mrs. Reed?
The good Colonel waited outside the door. Up and down, back and forth, he paced, almost as if he were once again on guard duty. Grim-faced, tense, he waited. At long last.
You'd better come in, Colonel. Quick.
Doctor, is she...
I'm afraid so. I've done everything I can.
A few moments later, Elizabeth Reed was at rest, at last. Tears streamed down the Colonel's cheeks, but he was silent. There seemed nothing to say. The doctor led him away and told him gently,
It was acute gastritis and her heart. You'll want the minister, I assume, and the mortician. I'll send the certificate over. Natural causes.
There was a well-attended funeral. The flowers were piled high in tribute to the Colonel's position in the town as well as to the memory of his wife. And then the Colonel resumed his life, somewhat more lonely but still active, bearing himself in military fashion as he went about his small real estate business, and time drifted by. 1 month, 2, and then one day on the main street.
Good morning, Colonel.
Ah, Davis, good to see you.
I've hesitated discussing this, your recent bereavement and so on, but don't you think we need to close our deal, Reed?
Oh, yes, yes, of course. Well, that is, I'm rather by myself these days. Would you care to join me for tea or with something stronger one afternoon?
You say when, Reed. I'll be glad to.
Excellent. Then, shall we say tomorrow, 5-ish?
Why not? Your place or mine?
Oh, mine, of course. Delighted to have you. Have a scone, old man. Really excellent. My housekeeper has quite the touch.
Thank you, I will.
Almost as if we were a pair of elderly ladies. Tea and scone.
Two gentlemen, somewhat past middle age, enjoying tea and scones and making ready to discuss business. In fact, they did discuss business. A £500 deposit and the pending deal. And John Davis went home quite satisfied. John Davis went home and a little later called Dr. Ashley.
I don't understand it, Doctor. My stomach's like cast iron. Always has been. Now, suddenly, this.
None of us are quite as young as we used to be. Even cast iron can wear thin with use. Eat anything out of the ordinary, John? Today? Yesterday?
No, nothing. Had some scones for tea. The butter may have been a bit rancid, but tasted perfectly fresh. Over at Colonel Reed's.
Eh? Reed's?
Yes, that's why. We had a little business to discuss. He asked me over. It seems quite lonely since his wife passed on, so I went, mostly to keep him company.
Oh, nice of you. Well, just take the prescription I'm leaving you. Rest a day or two. You'll be all right.
What's wrong, Doctor?
Oh, nothing. Just a quirk of memory.
Oh? How so?
Your symptoms and Mrs. Reed's rather the same. Nothing serious about it, just odd. That we should have two similar cases in such close juxtaposition. A town like this, a doctor gets to know most of the illness.
As the doctor said, nothing serious. Just an interesting coincidence. And in a day or so, John Davis was up and about. Aside from a slight tenderness in his abdomen, he felt no after effects. All was well. All was quiet. Everyone was his courteous self, including Colonel Reed.
Well, now, candy. And from the Colonel. How decent of him. Here it is, Doctor. The same wrappings it came in.
Nice-looking box. Don't you care for candy, John? You haven't eaten much.
As a matter of fact, I don't. I did offer a piece to the charwoman at the office. You see, one's missing.
The charwoman, eh? Is that the way you treat a gift? With the hope you are sufficiently recovered to enjoy this, Harry Reed. Rather decent of him.
That's what I thought, until the charwoman was taken with pains and reaching an hour after she ate the candy.
Are you suggesting anything, John?
That would be slanderous at this stage, wouldn't it?
There's nothing to it, John. There couldn't be. The Colonel...
Well, I inquired at the probate office. He did rather well following his wife's death and her will, you know. He never had any money of his own to speak of. Former military men rarely do.
Yes, it might be interesting. I've done practically no laboratory work of my own for some time. But I have a little equipment. Shall I try my hand at a bit of chemical analysis, John? I'm curious about the contents of that box of candy. You seem to be as well as I.
The doctor was methodical, to say the least. He took his time setting up his equipment, preparing reagents, making ready for his private little tests. Meanwhile, John Davis ran into his friend the Colonel on the street.
John, good to see you.
How are you, Harry? You're looking fit.
Well, I try to keep that way. Care to join me for another attack of indigestion, Omen?
Well, today, the champagne glass we've been talking about can be seen, as you might expect, among the other exhibits in the Black Museum. The Colonel and John Davis parted quite amicably on the street. Davis watched the smart military walk the ramrod straight back as the Colonel paraded into his own office under his head. Somehow it didn't seem quite plausible that this man might be something quite different than what he seemed. The next afternoon, the telephone rang in John Davis's office.
Yes?
Oh, that you, John? This is Harry here.
Harry? Oh, yes, of course. How are you?
Ah, very well. And you?
Quite well.
No more stomachache?
No trace.
Well, then how about this evening?
Oh, sorry, old man, I can't this evening. But perhaps in a day or so.
Oh, too bad. Oh, I'll be speaking to you. Goodbye.
Bye.
That evening, Davis had a previous appointment with Dr. Ashley in his makeshift laboratory.
This little operation here is the marsh test.
Oh?
For arsenic. Interesting. Yes, isn't it? Particularly since I found that every piece of candy in your gift box had arsenic in it.
Good Lord.
Arsenic, you see, is a cumulative poison. A person may have a tolerance for quite a large amount of it. But it usually fails to pass through the human system. It accumulates, and bit by bit the fatal dose is built up until one day the victim dies. Dr. Ashley explained all this to John Davis. Finally, John grasped the significance of the facts.
Each piece of candy would never bother the ordinary stomach, or the cast iron type, such as you boasted you have. Most people could eat a piece or two, indeed. You had eaten most of the candy yourself. Well, you follow me, I gather?
Follow you? Doctor, I'm a step ahead of you. But exactly what that step is, I'm not sure. I think we need expert help.
The local constabulary?
I said expert help.
Where from?
The CID, Scotland Yard.
It was a clear, cogent letter reciting the situation as Dr. Ashley and John Davis knew it. It was addressed to the Home Secretary, the gentleman in the British government responsible for the police force in general. In due course, the letter reached the desk of Inspector Charles in Scotland Yard. Following the set routine, Inspector Charles showed the communication to his immediate assistant, Detective Sergeant Hatch.
Well, nothing else for it. You and I will have to take a small trip to the country. Frankly, I won't mind. I can use a touch of country air after all.
They came into the quiet town unobtrusively. Two men on a walking tour, vacationists. They put up at the inn. Toward sundown, they strolled about the town, quite casually. They turned in at the gate with its little sign announcing that Dr. Ashley had his dispensary there. Once, however, within the doctor's office.
Now then, Doctor, perhaps you'd let Sergeant Hatch and I have it from the beginning.
Well, my entrance into the situation came shortly after Mrs. Reed returned from the sanitarium.
She'd been ill?
Mentally ill.
Nervous breakdown?
Rather more than that. She'd been certified insane. She was discharged as being quite stable once again.
And you were called in?
In my professional capacity. I found her past help. Acute gastritis, or so it seemed at the time.
But it doesn't seem so now?
You understand, Inspector, I have no facts. At least not on that side. I merely analyzed the box of candy received by John Davis shortly after he'd been taken ill.
Doctor, would this Colonel Reed benefit from Mr. Davis's death?
There'd been something about a real estate and a deposit paid. Quite a large sum, I believe. Mr. Davis can give you the details.
One final question, sir. Who had Mrs. Reed committed to the institution in the first instance?
Why, I believe the husband did. But the records will be available to you, of course.
Of course. Oh, thank you, Doctor. If we need you...
By the time they left the doctor's office, Inspector Charles and Sergeant Hatch felt they had heard an interesting, if circumstantial, story. Their next stop, naturally, was John Davis's home.
You've no idea, gentlemen, what a relief it is to have police officers of your caliber on the job. Thank you. About the candy and the card in the box, do you have any definite reason to believe the Colonel wants you, well, out of the way?
There's the matter of £500 he either will not or cannot explain.
And, Dr. Ashley mentioned Mrs. Reed's will.
Yes, curious about that. There was one will made out entirely in favor of her children by her first marriage. The will which was accepted and executed was in the Colonel's handwriting, but signed by Mrs. Reed, and produced subsequent to her death.
You find that interesting, I take it, Sergeant?
I expect you do as well, sir.
Quite. Mr. Davis, do you think it might be possible to exhume Mrs. Reed's body without the matter becoming common knowledge in the whole town?
The men from Scotland Yard accomplished the almost impossible. Armed with the proper papers, plus tools and dark lanterns, they supervised the removal of the body at night, with no one the wiser except the necessary officials. This feat completed, they waited quite patiently. The government analyst was called in. The report was brief. Inspector Charles read it to Dr. Ashley.
Examination reveals the presence of 4 grains of arsenic, more than a fatal dose, and the largest amount of the poison I have ever found in human remains. Well, that's it, Doctor.
And I didn't recognize the symptoms. Acute gastritis, I call it.
Why should you have recognized them, sir? I dare say murder of any kind is hardly a common occurrence in your practice. Well, Sergeant, since our warrant is all in order, it begins to appear that a search of Colonel Reed's premises may be next on the agenda.
Now the pretense of the walking tour was completely discarded. It was Saturday, and the sleepy little village was just about bestirring itself. The inspector and the sergeant walked a short distance from the inn to Colonel Reed's place of business, almost directly opposite Davis's office. The sergeant tried the door.
Not locked, sir.
A locked door in these parts would arouse more suspicion than not. Let's go in, shall we?
One file cabinet, one desk, telephone, chair for visitors. Can't do much of a business.
I dare say not. Let's get to it.
The search was quite thorough. The desk was emptied of its contents. These were replaced in an orderly fashion.
Oh, nothing extraordinary here, sir. Oh? What do you make of this, sir?
Champagne glass. Rear of the file cabinet. It's odd.
Shall I hold it aside, sir?
Yes, you may as well. Interesting, the trace of sediment. Apparently it was never washed after it was used the last time. Anything else in there, Sergeant?
Oh, what's going on in here?
Colonel Reed?
Yes. More to the point for you to identify yourselves and your business here, if any.
Inspector Charles, CID. My identity card. This is Sergeant Hatch.
I see. I assume you have a warrant for this search?
We do. Right here, Colonel.
Oh, very well. Go on with your work.
May I ask why you were keeping the champagne glass in the file cabinet?
A memento to my poor wife. We drank from it. Oh, that is, she did about a week before she passed away.
A nice gesture, if I may say so. And still with a trace of the sediment at the bottom. Careful, sir. It'd be a pity to have the glass break after all this time.
Oh, sorry. Awkward of me to brush against it like that.
Yes, wasn't it? All right, Sergeant, you can open the desk drawer the Colonel just closed and see what he put in it.
But you said you'd finish.
Your pardon, Colonel.
I've had quite enough of this.
These paper packets weren't in here a few minutes ago, Inspector.
How many?
Look here, I wouldn't have
20 of them, sir.
I'll take one. Thank you. White powder. Well, this wouldn't be arsenic, would it, Colonel?
It not only would be, it is.
Really?
Well, as you can see, I'm wearing my gardening coat. Ordinarily, I do not come into the office on Saturday, but something came up. I've been planning an experiment in my garden, hence the arsenic.
A gardening experiment? With 20 packets of arsenic?
Yes. My lawn is plagued with dandelions, roughly 24 of them. I plan to drill a small hole at the root of each weed, pour in the arsenic in each of those packets, and kill each dandelion individually, rather than take the chance of ruining the whole lawn.
Sorry, Colonel, it's a good story, but rather far-fetched. Particularly since you tried to rid yourself of the packets before we searched your person. And particularly since the charge pending is willful murder of your wife by arsenical poisoning.
But this is ridiculous. Someone is... Sergeant!
Keep that champagne glass safe before Colonel Reed succeeds in smashing it.
Yes, sir.
Colonel Reed, you are under arrest. The charge is murder. I must warn you that anything you may say...
I will not stand. Oh, no, Sergeant. I'll be acquitted. You'll see, and then I'll have to leave here. A trial?
That'll be quite enough, Colonel. You've made several mistakes, not the least of which was your attempt on John Davis, and your preservation of this glass. A sentimental gesture, but rather silly. My bet is the sediment in it will turn out to be arsenic. You must have been very sure of yourself, Colonel, to leave this glass unwashed. Very sure of yourself indeed. Bring him along, Sergeant. I think he'll come quietly now.
And today, that champagne glass can be seen in the Black Museum.
Orson Welles will be back with you in just a moment.
There was no doubt about one facet of Colonel Reed's character. He was a man of great pride. His behavior at the trial was exemplary. His bearing, military. He repeated his story of the separate packets of arsenic for separate dandelions, and he sounded as if he'd made a good case of it. At least for himself. But not, as it turned out, for the jury. Colonel Reed accepted his sentence as if it were an order from a superior officer. And one morning, at the traditional time of 8 o'clock, Colonel Reed marched to the scaffold as if he were on parade. And as for the champagne glass, well, it remains in its customary place, as I told you, in Scotland Yard. Now, until we meet next time, in the same place, and I tell you another story about the Black Museum, I remain, as always, obediently yours.
This is Orson Welles, speaking from London.
The Black Museum. Here in the grim stone structure on the Thames, which houses Scotland Yard, is a warehouse of homicide, where everyday objects like a sugar bowl, an ashtray, a portable radio, all are touched by murder. There's a hammer. A hammer, that's a familiar object. Everybody's used one at some time. To drive a tack, or pull a nail, or loosen a window sash, or what have you. Nearly everybody has at one time or another taken part in a conversation like this.
Beg pardon, ma'am. Could you pass me my hammer?
Your hammer? Oh, yes, of course.
Thank you, ma'am.
You're not going to use that hammer on the tiles over my fireplace.
No, ma'am. Not on the tiles over the fireplace.
Well, today, a hammer, an ordinary hammer, but with a very strange story attached to it, can be found in the Black Museum.
From the annals of the Criminal Investigation Department of the London Police, we bring you the dramatic stories of the crimes recorded by the objects in Scotland Yard's Gallery of Death, the Black Museum.
Here we are, the Black Museum. Scotland Yard's Museum of Murder. Yes, within this room is proof that anything and everything may be part of homicide. Yes, here lies death. Death entombed in glass. Death on endless shelves. Murder on exhibition. Tabulated, indexed, guarded, filed. Here's a length of wire. Wireless antenna, sleek, shining, coppery, designed to bring pleasure to the human ear. This wire missed the ear. Instead, it was wrapped around a soft, white neck. Twisted. Perfect garrote. Here's a cigarette lighter. It's dainty, jeweled, monogrammed, stolen from its proper owner, and then flicked, lighted, applied to no cigarette. The victim had a bad heart. Who was to know this? Question: was it murder? Answer: yes. Here we are. It's the hammer. It's a claw hammer with two curved blades designed for pulling nails. It's heavy, well balanced, perfect tool. One Saturday morning, it rested in a canvas bag. The owner rang a doorbell in Oxford.
Sorry, ma'am. Did I take you by surprise?
Well, yes. You see, I was expecting a friend of mine, and, well, to see a young man standing there when you're expecting an elderly lady...
Nothing to take amiss, ma'am. My card.
Oh, thank you. James Knight, house repairs while you wait. Oh, well, thank you, but there's nothing wrong with my house.
That's what everybody says. Only I don't mean the house itself. I mean the household. Furniture and the like. It's the little things gets people talking.
Well, I'm sure I don't need anything done.
Now, you take your doormat, ma'am, right there. Look, along the edges. The binding's going. You notice it now? A stitch in time, as the saying goes, and you'll not be needing a new mat in 6 months.
Well, I do declare. You're right.
Now, ma'am, if you'd just let me check your house, I'd be willing to bet I'd found a dozen little items. Cost you a few pence now, help me to earn my living and save you pounds later. Now, can I come in, ma'am? Thank you.
You are a smooth talker, aren't you, young man?
Oh, I need to be in my business. Now, if you just show me your living room...
Through the portiere, right there.
Yes, a very nice room. Blends with your personality, if I may say so. Now then, right to work. Tools down. Well, we'll just look about. I'll bet anything you want. I'll find a dozen things need fixing.
Now he's inside. He notes the room. He's well aware of the brass crucifix on the mantel shelf, the prissy draperies at the windows, the antimacassars on the mahogany-framed horsehair chairs. It's almost a museum.
Now, you take this chair, ma'am. The leg's loose. Bound to be. The glue dries out. The wood shrinks. Well, you know.
Well, I never noticed it.
You wouldn't, ma'am. Takes an expert's eye. A drop of glue today saves a new chair tomorrow. And they don't build furniture like this nowadays.
No, I dare say they don't. Oh, dear, it's my telephone.
No one to answer it?
Well, the girl who stays with me has gone to the country. Bank holiday weekend. She won't be back till Monday night.
Well, you just answer it. I'll be all right. Oh, beg pardon, ma'am. Mm-hmm. Could you pass me my hammer?
Your hammer? Oh, yes, of course.
Oh, thank you, ma'am.
You're not going to use that hammer on the tiles over my fireplace.
Oh, no, ma'am. Just tap them with the wooden handle. See if they're loose anywhere. Oh, you can trust me, ma'am. You just answer your telephone.
Oh, dear, yes, of course, the telephone. Hello? Why, Caroline.
Mrs. Golden, that's her name, answers the telephone. The young man in the living room, front room to Mrs. Golden, taps the tiles merrily, and then he stops. He looks around, looks at things, and quickly in a few things. He shuts the desk just as...
Oh, dear, this is a disappointment. Something's wrong with my friend's car, and she can't come for me after all, and it is such a nice day.
Oh, that is too bad. But not too inconvenient. Now I can really get some work done.
Oh? You found a lot of things to repair?
About £50 worth.
But you said only a few pence today.
That was earlier. Now it's going to cost you £50 to get me out of this house.
I don't understand.
I think you do. You know, I know you had £50 in the mail yesterday. You told a couple of your girlfriends, and I heard about it. Now then, Grandma, hand it over.
You get out of here. Well, I'll call the police.
£50 here.
I will call.
Don't try anything. I'm between you and the phone now. Now pay up, Grandma, or I'll have to beat it out of you.
You wouldn't. You couldn't. No. Put the hammer away.
You heard me. I'm through asking now. Now, where's the money?
I didn't really get it. I was just boasting.
Cut it. Put down that vase.
I won't. Stay away from me. Keep away.
Put it down.
Throw it. Keep away.
Did it.
Keep away.
Fight with me, will you? You haven't had enough, have you? Try this one, and this one, and this one.
Bank holiday in Oxford. No one due home until Monday evening. Someone tried late Sunday. Whoever it was kept trying, but only the bell sounded in the empty house. Empty? Was it filled with death? Monday morning, a man somewhat younger but not much than Mrs. Golden parked his middle-class car in front of the house in Oxford. He had a worried expression on his face as he walked up the few steps and pressed the doorbell. Again he tried. No answer. Ran down the steps around to the back, knocked on the back door. Nothing. Nothing but the sound of his own fists beating the thin panels. Now he is upset. He peers in at the kitchen window. Finally, he wraps his hand in his muffler, as he's seen them do in the movies, and punches a hole in the window. He reaches in, unlocks the window, lifts the sash, and climbs in. He walks through the house toward the front. Silence, save for his own strangely empty footsteps. At the portieres in the arch which lead to the living room, he stops.
Good heavens! What's this? It's blood! Operator, please, hurry! Put me through to Scotland Yard. There's been my sister's been murdered.
Well, that's how it comes, you know. First the bitter shock, the cry on the telephone, the hurried, incoherent report, and then the cars racing through the streets, pulling up, the men piling out, invading a once peaceful home.
Mrs. Golden was your sister, Mr. Bevan.
That's right. I can't understand it, Inspector. I just can't.
I know how you must feel, and you want to help us all you can.
Of course, of course.
Well, then, time is very often the essence. I'll have to ask you a few questions right away.
I'll try to answer them.
You told us you broke the back window yourself, right?
Yes, that's right. When she didn't answer the phone Sunday evening, I began to worry. I drove here this morning. The doors were locked and no one answered the bell. I broke in. I suppose I should have called a constable, but I didn't...
I understand. Tell me, Mr. Bevan, did your sister have any enemies?
Of course not.
Oh, pardon me, Inspector. We found this under the crucifix on the mantel. It's £50.
Thank you, Sergeant. Apparently robbery was the motive. Mr. Bevan, do you happen to know where your sister would get £50?
She had a small income. Perhaps the money was a dividend.
Preliminary medical report, Inspector.
Go ahead, Doctor.
Well, death occurred about 48 hours ago. Make it Saturday in the morning. We'll tell more after the autopsy.
Saturday. 2 days start on us. Go on, Doctor.
She was struck on the head by a blunt instrument several times. A hammer or something of that sort. But the fellow was taking no chances. Her carotid artery was severed by something very sharp. That's why the blood.
Whoever it was, well, it looks very professional, the way the place was ransacked. We've nothing much here. But, shall we have a go at it, Sergeant?
Well, they had a go at it, the inspector and the sergeant. There's nothing in the woman's house. Not even a smudged fingerprint. But, as Sergeant Marshall put it...
I've seen this sort of thing before. Looks like a house-to-house canvasser to me, Inspector.
It has that familiar feel about it. Routine, Sergeant.
The routine. Door to door, up and down the street. Questions, questions, questions.
Did a canvasser call here Saturday morning, ma'am? Leave a card or anything?
Do you remember anyone ringing the bell to leave a card, sir? Wanting to do repair work?
Thank you, miss. Yes, you've been quite helpful.
5 houses up the street, 5 down the street. And strangely enough, results.
A bit too careful, Mr. Knight.
Too careful, Inspector?
And too smart for himself. He left his card at all the houses on the street, and this one in the middle, he picked up the card before he left Saturday morning. Foolish. Bound to attract attention to himself.
Knight. James Knight. It's familiar.
Joe Knowles. His favorite alias is James Knight.
Oh, I remember now, sir. 2 years in Dartmoor. Assault and battery on an elderly lady.
Right. Well, call for a car, Sergeant. We may as well check the address on this card.
Mr. Knight? Oh, yes. He used to live here.
I see. Used to live here.
Well, been packed up and gone these 2 months now. Quiet sort of fella, though I didn't cotton to him much.
Thank you, Mum. Thank you very much.
Welcome, I'm sure.
Not 2 days behind, Inspector. 2 months.
We're not doing too badly, Sergeant. We know when and how he got in. We know how he committed the crime, and we've got a good idea who he is. Not too badly, Sergeant.
No, not too badly. But the inspector forgot to mention the most important clue of all. The murder weapon. That selfsame hammer, which can be seen today in the Black Museum. It looked like a long haul. 2 months behind and no trace. Not a thing to place him in Oxford on the Saturday of bank holiday. The calling cards, true, but they might have been left any time. And one confused witness would make any jury doubt the exact pinpointing of the date. Still, the man had to be found. Scotland Yard began its long, steady, methodical routine.
Circulate Knight's description from his prison record. Have prints made of his picture. Somebody will remember him somewhere. They always do.
Somebody did. The landlord of a tavern in Oxford, half a mile from the house where death had struck that Saturday morning.
I remember that fella. Certainly do.
You're sure now?
Positive. Come in here, looked like he needed a drink. Took 2 whiskies, straight. One right after the other. Was carrying a tool bag of some kind, I think.
How long did he stay?
Just till a bus stopped outside. He threw the price on the bar and hopped the bus real quick like.
Do you happen to know where the bus was headed?
Aylesbury. No other bus stops right outside that door.
A break in the luck. Aylesbury. The town was investigated, to all practical intents and purposes, and before long, Inspector Graham and Sergeant Marshall were in the lobby of a small rundown hotel talking with a combination desk clerk and telephone operator.
Do you remember Mr. Knight, Miss Marsh?
Oh, I do that. Of course, he's not the kind I'd pay much attention to, but I remember him all right. Is he in trouble?
Why do you ask?
Oh, well, sort of. Well, you know how it is. A man leaves here sudden-like, after being in and out for a couple of months. Then a couple of fellows come looking for him. Well, you wonder, that's all.
We're from Scotland Yard, miss.
Oh, then he is in trouble.
Maybe, maybe not. We'd like a look at his room.
I'll show you. Just one flight up. Davy, watch my board, I'm busy. This way, gentlemen.
An obliging girl, Miss Marsh. Complete with pass key, she ushered the men up the worn stairway along the dim hall. She fitted the key, swung open the door.
There you are, Inspector.
Thank you, miss.
Seems to have left a bit of baggage, Inspector.
So he has. This is Knight's, isn't it, miss?
Oh, didn't I mention it? Oh, he said he'd probably be back. So would I mind if he left his bag, even though he didn't want to keep on with the room rent? So I left it here, just in case he came back before we let the room.
Nice of you. Open it, Sergeant.
Not locked. Well, careless type of fellow.
A new hammer. Nothing much else. Look around, Sergeant. Look around.
Yes, sir. Oh, funny. This book, sir, in the bag. A dictionary.
I dare say Knight isn't a bookworm. It's odd. It's a dictionary. Look a bit further, Sergeant.
Yes, sir.
Anything familiar about this, Miss Marsh?
I was waiting for you to ask me, sir. It's mine. He borrowed it one night after he came in with the newspapers.
Oh, newspapers?
Oh, yes, sir. He was a great one for the papers, especially the Globe News. He'd been a fury if we didn't save one for him at the desk.
I see. Did he do much writing up here?
Well, now that you mention it, sir, he did. Lots of letters, always to the papers. Do you suppose he wrote those Dear Editor things?
No, I doubt that, but I have a fair idea what he did write. Anything else, Sergeant?
Not a thing, sir. Clean as a whistle. Back to the yard, sir.
Back to the yard.
Odd, the man said. Odd indeed. A hammer, which may be a murder weapon, side by side with a dictionary. A possible killer writing letters to the editor. Or were they letters to the editor? Inspector tackled the hammer first.
Canvass every ironmonger and hardware dealer in Oxford. Find out which carries this make of hammer. Check their sales slips for that particular Saturday. Try to jog the salesman's memories. Find out where that hammer came from.
And then the dictionary, the newspapers and the mail.
Ever look into the Globe News, Sergeant?
Sometimes, sir. I'm not much of a crossword puzzle fan myself.
Yes, Sergeant. Our Joe Knowles, alias James Knight, is obviously a crossword puzzle addict. I think we're due for a literary detail at the Globe News, with samples of our friend's handwriting from his prison record. Hop to it, Sergeant, and keep your eyes open.
It turned out to be quite a problem. 10,000 entries per week in the Globe News' puzzle contest were the average number. Not a pleasant prospect. Not at all. Stolidly, the crew from the yard started to go through 10,000 puzzles, checking against the photostatic copies of James Knight's handwriting. The second morning at the job.
Inspector Graham here.
Sergeant Marshall, sir, at the newspaper.
You found something, Sergeant?
Not in the file, sir. In the morning mail. From Brighton. An entry in the latest contest. Address 912 Leader Street. Name of John Kinder. But there's no mistaking the handwriting.
They'll do it every time, won't they? Joe Knowles, James Knight, now John Kinder.
Yes, sir, I noticed. Always the same initials on the aliases. J.K. this time.
Bring the puzzle and the envelope. I'll have him picked up in Brighton. 912 Leader Street, you said?
912 Leader Street, Brighton, England. The order moved swiftly now on the teletype along the wires from the banks of the Thames across the North Downs to the South Downs, the famous resort city on the English Channel.
you now, police.
No need for all the melodrama, sir. You were looking for me?
You're James Knight, also known as Joe Knowles and John Kinder.
You ought to know, officer.
You're wanted, Knight. You'll have to come along. I have to warn you, anything you say may be taken down and used in evidence against you.
You did a good job, Selden, picking him up so quickly.
Oh, he came along with surprising quietness, sir.
The fellow probably knows we've little to build a case on.
Hello, what's this?
Well, it looks like a hole in the floor, Sergeant.
I know, sir, but there's 4 more in the floor, sir. Square holes. Now, the floor is the ceiling of the room below.
Oh? Who lives below, Selden?
The landlady. Eccentric soul. We've warned her several times. She will keep her rent money in a jar on the mantelpiece.
So that's why he watched her.
That's your theory, Sergeant?
Well, you can see every corner of that room, sir, through these holes. And they're recent. Well, the wood's still fresh and white, Inspector.
Square holes. Why?
When you dig a hole with a chisel, Selden, you not only get a square hole, you also can keep the shavings from falling in the room below.
A chisel? Where would he have ditched it?
Possibly through the window when you knocked. A chisel, Selden, is sharp enough to cut other things beside wood. A carotid artery, for instance. So you prepared a statement, Knight?
Yes, Inspector. I've been informed of the charge you may lodge against me. I'm told it entails a murder in Oxford on the Saturday of the bank holiday.
That's correct.
You'll find my movements for that day accounted for in my statement. It may be troublesome locating some of my witnesses, but I doubt if you all have much difficulty.
You were in that street in Oxford, though?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, indeed. Trying to make an honest living, sir.
No doubt. Strange you failed to leave a card at Mrs. Golden's.
I rang several times on my way up and down the street. No answer.
And you didn't push it under the door?
No. Cards are expensive, Inspector. I prefer to explain my business first and leave a card if there's any interest. You're, having this taken down, aren't you, Inspector?
You got all this, Sergeant?
Oh, yes, sir.
And we'll enter Knight's statement in the record also.
Yes, sir.
I, see no reason for holding me any longer. Do you, Inspector?
You'll be quite comfortable. No rent to pay, Knight. Just until we check your alibi and find your witnesses. After that, Knight, well, we'll see. All right, Sergeant. Take this man back.
The end of a trail. The suspect perfectly at ease, willing, even slightly over-willing. But they held him anyway. There were still some loose ends to tie up. One of those ends might be the key to the puzzle. One of those ends just might be the end of a hangman's noose.
We've got a report on the hammer, Inspector.
At last, eh? Where? How?
An ironmonger in Oxford sold a hammer from his stock. Here's a sample. To a fellow answering Knight's description on Bank Holiday Saturday, sir. The sales slip is dated and the salesman is prepared to identify. The slip also includes a chisel.
I see. Seems identical to the one we've had. What's this label?
The salesman says it's all on this type. High-class steel forging.
Nothing on ours, is there?
Oh, no, sir.
Let's have a look in that valise we found the hammer in Adele's.
Yes, sir.
An empty traveling bag. Just lint. A few tiny crumbs of something. They might have been dried dough or...
Even breadcrumbs, Inspector.
Or paper, Sergeant. Would you pass me the sponge there, the one for sealing envelopes? I think there's enough water in the dish.
Gently now, Inspector. Moisten the tiny pellets of dough-like substance on the glass top of your desk. Gently now. Roll them back and forth. Loosen them. Spread them out on the desktop. Slowly. Gently. Patiently. And then...
We'd better have this photograph, Sergeant. I doubt if we can preserve them for the trial.
Yes, sir.
We've broken his alibi. Knight was in Oxford that day. He bought the hammer. High-class steel forging. He should have burnt this label, Sergeant, not merely crumbled it in this way. I do believe our careful Mr. Knight, our clever, cooperative Mr. Knight, is going to be hung, and very shortly at that.
Well, today, that hammer, complete with its proper label, can be seen in the Black Museum. Inspector Graham was right. The hammer, plus the label, did hang James Knight. His alibi was broken by the salesman in the hardware store in Oxford who sold Jim Knight that hammer on the Saturday Mrs. Golden died.
Inspector Graham needn't have worried about his case, nor need you worry about the hammer in your kitchen drawer. If there is any moral to this story beyond the inevitable lesson that criminals are nearly always caught, it's this. Be careful whom you let in your house when you're alone to demonstrate a new gadget or even to fix your furniture. Your visitor might mean death. And now until we meet next time in the same place for another story about the Black Museum, I remain as always obediently yours.
Thank you for listening to and showing your support for my podcast. If you would like to receive notifications of when new episodes are posted, please subscribe to my channel. Subscriptions are 100% free, and they really help me get an idea of how I'm doing.